Just about an hour from now, Barack Obama is going to take the stage and talk to a very excited crowd. We have live team coverage tonight.
I can tell you that literally during Rick's story, the wind and the rain picked up again. In fact, videographer Megan, I want you to come on over here and show the folks if we could. You know, we have these huge pilings here along the Pasquotank River, and as the water laps up against them, they are actually shuddering back and forth.
Chief Meteorologist Mike Harvey joins us live. Mike, you were telling me a minute ago that a storm cell came over right as they were still trying to pull people out of the rubble and find out if there's anybody still alive in there.
You can see why a fisherman wouldn't want to wear it, because it's almost impossible in these gloves to beat a hook. But then again, if it can save your life, it's worth it.
Still under investigation, but it looks as though the rudder of the cruise ship is what actually cut a gash into its side.
Hello, Bianca and Barbara, and welcome to balmy Buffalo, New York, where there is still snow on the ground from weeks ago. Well, he said he's got to wait until high tide to get his sailboat out of here, but the TV still works, so he's going to watch his ill fortune on News Channel 3. Well, Bianca, the president should be arriving in about 10 minutes. In fact, we've seen a lot of activity here in just the last few. Some of the family members and staff members here at the airport have grabbed their cameras and have pulled up here in front of me at the wire so that they can get a good shot of the president. Also, a lot of military activity. Some jets and Coast Guard helicopters have been landing and circling the perimeter, making sure that the airspace is safe for Air Force One. The first trip for President Obama on Air Force One, where he will be landing here on the tarmac really any minute now. And of course, as soon as he does, we will be bringing that landing to you and hoping that he may walk over to us and answer a couple of questions. Now, we told you earlier that he's heading over to Kings Mill Resort to speak to a gathering of House Democrats. It's a House Democrat caucus retreat where he is going to be focusing, of course, on the economy and several other issues, and then we'll fly out from the same airport a little bit later on tonight. He will take a motorcade over to the resort, and therefore some of the interstates will have to be shut down. So if you are trying to get somewhere in Williamsburg tonight, you may want to decide to stay home and wait until about 7 or 8 o'clock this evening when those roads and interstates will be clear. Now, as I mentioned, the president will be gone tonight, but the vice president plans to arrive tomorrow, and he will speak to the Democrats as well. There will be several governors from across the country that will be coming in, and so look for full coverage of this retreat and the president's visit here on News Channel 3. Reporting in Newport News, Pat McReynolds, News Channel 3.
Well, my colleague Pat McReynolds has been in Blacksburg since Monday night. He's returning tomorrow. And Pat, I want to talk with you about the past few days. And this is a story that has had a range of emotions, from shock to horror to sadness to resolve.
That's true, Kurt. In fact, it almost seems like there's been a different emotion for every single day. Of course, the horror of the very first day. Then as we started to learn the names of some of the victims, the great sadness on Tuesday. And then, of course, the videos of the killer that he sent out to NBC, and the anger that we felt here from the community when they saw that video on television. You know, we talked about this a little bit earlier. As journalists, you try to stay detached from every story you cover, not much less a tragedy such as this. But I don't think anyone could have really imagined the scope of this. And I think it has affected everyone, law enforcement officials, journalists, really anyone in this whole community.
Is there one image, you know, over the days that you've been up there, is there one image that stands out in your mind?
Boy, there are so many, I'll tell you, but I think that what really touched me, and you can't help but be touched this entire time, but the one image that really hit me was when we were covering a prayer service over on the drill field, and about 100 yards away from where all of the students were gathered was a young man, probably in his young 20s, a student dressed in Virginia Tech colors, who was hidden behind a tree almost intentionally, you know, just sitting down, leaning up against the tree and just doubled over, crying and sobbing. You know, you don't often see that, and he was alone and he was so upset, and I think that one really hit us all. It hit our entire crew to see that type of emotion from someone that probably would not normally show it.
And let us talk about something that has maybe sustained people in this. I spoke with the church members and the family spokesperson for Lauren McCain, the girl from Hampton, one of the local victims who did not survive this massacre. I was just struck by the church members and the family spokespeople that were just saying that it is their faith in God that is pulling them through this. Are you seeing the same thing up in Blacksburg?
I am. In fact, several students have told us the same thing. And you know, something interesting, Kurt, that we haven't reported, and maybe you haven't heard, but several students have come up to us and said that they want to extend their prayers to the family of the shooter himself, because they also are victims in this horrible tragedy. And Kurt, I know that you are going to be back with us in just a little bit with news from across Hampton Roads and, of course, across the country. But as we pause and decide to back away and respect the wishes of the Blacksburg community here and back away from the scene, we thought it only appropriate
to pause and remember the names and the faces of the 32 souls who we've been proud to share their stories with for the last 4 days.
Good evening, everyone. Live from NAS Oceana, I'm Pat McReynolds.
And I'm Bianca Martinez here live in the newsroom.
Bianca, we're going to join you in the studio in just a few minutes, but I want to go ahead and set the scene here at NAS Oceana, where the twilight show of this weekend air show is currently ongoing. In fact, if we can take the second vantage point camera, we can show you that there is a decent crowd here. Despite what happened this morning, there was a lot of discussion as to whether or not this air show should go on when one of the Geico Sky Typers, one of 5 that was in the air just after noon this afternoon, crashed just before the tree line when he was performing a difficult maneuver with the other pilots. His airplane appeared to lose power, and then he went straight to the ground. Now, I, of course, wasn't here this afternoon, but as I mentioned, we were broadcasting live, and I want to bring in our own Barbara Sierra, who was on the air at the time. And Barbara, I know this was difficult for everyone here. In fact, it wasn't a full crowd this afternoon. It was just VIPs and special guests, correct?
Yes, it was mainly school children, Pat. And so what was unbelievable to me, these crowds of school kids, they got off their school buses. They were here for a sneak preview before the show started. It never came back.
All right, Barbara. Well, we were glad to have you here when this happened to give us that firsthand look of everything that was going on. And I know that you had a full crew out here with you, and I want to go ahead and bring them in and bring in some of that video, but thank you very much.
And our prayers are with that family tonight.
That's right. In fact, let's talk a little bit more about that pilot who passed away. He was very experienced, and of course, all the pilots that are out here during these air shows usually are, because of the danger involved, because of the precise movements involved in all of these acrobatic moves that they have to do. Now, of course, Stacey Davis was here earlier as well, and she has been following that side of the story really to tell us how this might have happened and which pilot was involved.
Well, as you said, all the pilots that are here are safe and keeping things like that out of their mind. They got to focus.
All right, Stacey, and I know that you talked to some pilots, and we're going to have that part of your story coming up a little bit later on in the show. All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, she mentioned about how they have to concentrate when they're up in the air, and you can see some of the maneuvers that are going on to my right. You know exactly how dangerous this job is, but they all say they love it and they have to do it. But a horrible thing for everyone to see this morning, and it just so happened, as Barbara was mentioning, that there were several schools and a lot of children here and a lot of eyewitnesses to this crash. And our own Priscilla Monti talked to a lot of the witnesses earlier this afternoon.
Your News Channel 3 has several crews on scene, and Pat McReynolds anchors our team coverage live in Richmond. Pat?
Well, Barbara, Kurt, the proceedings inside the federal courtroom we've known for a couple days would be fairly predictable. Michael Vick, all pundits, of course, saying that he would plead not guilty. He would usher in, spend maybe 10 minutes in the courtroom, and then quickly usher away. All of the activity and excitement really happened outside of the federal courthouse. In fact, I want to go ahead and show you the crush of media that is still behind me and behind the courthouse here. All of the reporters from all over the country, of course, doing their live shots. There was a very large defense team, including Michael Vick's mother, that made a brief statement after the proceedings. We'll get to that in just a minute. And then the hundreds of protesters corralled out front by the several different law enforcement officials and departments. We'll get to that as well. We have all angles covered on this story, but I want to go ahead and get to the meat of it. And I want to bring in Bob Matthews now, who has been covering this from the very beginning. And you also, Bob, of course, sat in on the proceedings today. Go ahead and tell us what transpired.
Well, you know, Pat, trial just magnified this time, of course, because of who's involved.
Yeah, interesting, those witnesses, what they could possibly mean for his NFL career, not his legal career, of course.
Right.
We'll talk to Corey Curtis about that in a minute, but I wanted to ask you, because you, of course, watched the press conference afterwards. He never apologized, Michael Vick, directly to any of the accusations, but he did apologize not only to his family, as we heard, but also to his players. Did that strike you as interesting?
Yeah, it was a very carefully worded statement. Find out when the trial starts.
All right, Bob, thank you very much for your coverage. Of course, we'll hear more from you in just a little bit later, coming up at 5:30 and 6 o'clock. Bob mentioned the cheers that Michael Vick is used to. Not exactly the same thing today. There was a crush of protesters out front of the courthouse. Some of them lining up even before the sun came up this morning, lining up as early as 5 a.m. But you might be surprised to find out that they weren't all against Michael Vick. There was a contingent, a strong contingent, that was showing his support. And for that, I want to go ahead and bring in Giovanna Bouchard, who's been covering that angle of the story all day. Giovanna, you were telling me earlier that the breakdown probably 80% against Michael Vick, 20% for him. Did that surprise you at all?
You know, not really because of the fence here.
All right, Giovanna, thank you very much. I look forward to your story coming up again at 6 o'clock. And now we should probably discuss what happens to Michael Vick in the NFL. Of course, these legal proceedings will go on. In fact, they won't really start in earnest until November. But their training camp for the Atlanta Falcons started today, and I want to bring in our sports director, Corey Curtis. Corey, you've been watching these proceedings today, and I wanted to get your impressions and what could happen immediately for Michael Vick in his NFL career.
Well, immediately strained beyond repair. Pat?
So many questions still to be answered, Corey, and I know that you'll be following this very closely throughout our show today and our 90 minutes of news. I want to go ahead and wrap up our coverage for a few minutes here while we try to gather a little bit more information, and then I will be joining the interactive newsroom here right after our first commercial break to talk a little bit more about how such a star could end up in such a situation. But for now, reporting live in Richmond, Pat McReynolds, back to you.